And my personal welcome to everybody that's here today as we do discuss mentoring and that success for succession planning and what you're going to do. The types of things that we're going to cover today is we're going to talk about this concept of succession planning versus succession development in what you're doing. And then we're also going to talk about why should you even invest in succession development and going forward. We'll also talk about how mentoring can assist in that process, and we're going to actually take you through an actual case study of an organization that didn't have a succession pipeline and how we were able to help them. Then we're going to actually discuss some best practices for putting that success in succession planning as you go forward. What I'd like to do now is to begin by telling you a little bit about Insala. Insala is a global organization, and what we do is to really concentrate on what we call solutions. And when we look at total solution, that ensures sustainability for you in your mentoring initiative. We offer consulting, and that's around strategic planning to make sure you've got a good solid process and methodology in place in what you're doing. We also offer training for mentors, mentees, managers, and also the program administrators to just make sure that everybody understands what their role is and feeling comfortable in implementing that role. We do that in a workshop format, we do it in webinars, and what we do is we make sure that that's tailored to your organizational needs. And then we have the software as a service technology. The technology ensures that your mentoring program is going to be sustainable and that it's not going to become an administration nightmare. You know, you want to make sure you've got really good ways to be able to match and pair your mentors and mentees, whether that's through self-matching or facilitated matching. You also want to make sure there's a way for the mentors and mentees to set goals and objectives and to be able to track them, and then to be able to communicate with all of your participants, as well as being able to track and provide reports. So again, what we do is we look at this as a total solution. So, you know, let's begin talking then about some of the differences between succession planning versus succession development. And Blake, would you take us through our first poll, please?
Absolutely. For our first poll question, it's simple and straightforward. Does your organization have a succession plan? Yes, no. Perhaps you've heard rumors about it, but you're just not sure. Take a few minutes to go ahead and answer that for us. Give that a few more seconds. Great. Let's see the results. Okay, Judy, it looks like 61% of our attendees say their organization does have a succession plan. 30% say they do not, and only 9% are unsure. What do you think about that?
Okay, thank you, Blake. Yes, it's good to know that that large majority of organizations do have a succession plan in place. But again, what we want to begin to talk to you about is something looking not just at succession planning, but also succession development. And so we really hope you're going to be open to that as you were doing. So there we go. Let's start talking about a couple of things about succession planning versus succession development in what we're doing. So when we think about this, one of the first things that we want to talk about is some of the differences between succession planning and succession development is succession planning really is much more reactive when you think about it. You know, probably all of you have experienced a succession planning meeting. You know, there's a planning session. It's usually held in a special room. There's lots of flip charts and post-it notes and papers with notes on them about the succession pipeline and doing that. And, you know, many times the questions that are asked during those sessions begin with the phrase, who do you think? And it kind of goes on from there. Usually this has to do with getting people ready to move versus knowing people are all ready to move in doing that. We hear from organizations, the comment that says, but we can't always predict the roles that we'll need to fill. And sometimes that's true. But you do understand that skills and knowledge areas that are core to the organization, and you do know what the possibilities of needs might be. An example, individuals that are retiring soon. And you do have individuals that are either in or have specific roles that can help to get people ready to do that. So, think in terms of that proactive approach of what you want to be able to do. And then, one of the other things of succession versus development is guesswork. Again, that phrase that we talked about before. What do you think? It's a bit of a guess as you talk about individuals in going forward, and more often when you're talking about succession planning, it's more often based on what you think versus what you know, and that's that certainty in going forward. And then last, we usually think in terms of potential. Who has the potential to move into a specific role, instead of having a really clear picture of exactly who is ready now, because they already have proven performance specific to the role that you're discussing. And okay, speaking of potential, when it comes to succession planning, we normally are speaking about what organizations call high potentials. Now, when thinking of high potentials, normally it only has to do with those more senior levels in the organization. And if that's all you're thinking of, sometimes that can be pretty short-sighted. Organizations have got to stop thinking like that. If your high potentials are only looked at within those higher levels, the organization is always going to be in a type of reactive mode, always getting people ready. You've got to start thinking about that term high potentials as it relates to all levels of the organization, so you're continually in a proactive mode. That's why we titled this webinar Succession Development versus just succession planning and what we're doing. So again, normally when organizations think about high potentials, they're only thinking about those higher levels and what they're doing. It's as if you only want to really invest in those higher levels with special programs or trainings or projects or assignments. But think about it. It is important to look at all levels of the organization, not just the top levels. Short-term risk can happen at those higher levels, and that short-term risk might be a little higher there. But long-term risk takes place at all levels of the organization, and that long-term risk can be very, very detrimental to what you're doing and how you're taking it forward. So the next thing that we want to talk about is, why should you even invest in succession development? And Blake, would you take us through our next poll, please?
I'd love to. Our next poll question is a follow-up from the last. If you answered yes, that your organization has a succession plan in place, we'd like to know, how is your organization conducting succession planning? Do you use software to plan ahead of time? Do you wait until an employee leaves to consider their successor? Do you proactively use target development activities? Perhaps you're unsure about the method. And if you are sure about the method you use, but you don't see that option here, we'd like to hear about it. So feel free to enter in the chat box if you select other. Take a few moments to fill that out. Going to give this a few more seconds. Still see a few more results coming in. Great. About 70% response rate. Okay, Judy. Looks like 14% use software. 24% say they wait until an employee leaves. 50% say that they act proactively.
Wow, I really like the fact that we've got organizations that are acting proactively in what they're doing. And it was also great to be able to get some really good results because in the previous poll, 61% of you said that you did have a succession planning process in place in doing that. And we really do encourage you that if there was another way in which you actually conduct succession planning other than those that were listed, to make sure you do enter that in the chat box, because we would love to hear your reports on that. Okay, so as we go forward, we really want to talk about why should I even invest in this concept called succession development and what we're doing. Well, we believe you should for a couple of very strong reasons. One is it's about your ability to stay in business, because your ability to stay in business depends on your successors, whatever the level might be. And you want to make sure they're skilled and ready to lead the moment they take their role in what they're doing. We were working with one client, and this was a specific quote that they gave us. Yesterday we thought the future was a long way off. Now it's here, and we aren't ready. We don't have leaders or successors developed. We can't let that happen again. And, I'd like for all of you to think about the fact that where have you heard within your organization that same comment or one very similar to it? Now, another reason we believe that you should invest in succession development has to do with your ability to be competitive. And that ability depends on your leader's ability to be agile in your market and your industry. This same client that we work with in association with that first quote that you saw had another one. And they said, we need to develop our leaders and our high potentials before our competition does. And this is an incredibly global, competitive market. It doesn't matter whether you are local, national, or global. It's a very competitive market, and in order to be able to stay in business, you've got to make sure that you are agile and ahead of that market, and the only way that you can be ahead of that market is to invest in having your people ready ahead of time, ready for them to walk in and take over. So at this time, can you take us through our next poll, Blake?
Sure. For our final poll question, we'd like to know, how is your organization following through with your succession plan? Do you administer skill and competency assessments? Do you use developmental activities and strategies? Maybe you don't follow through at all. And again, if you enter other, we'd love to hear about how you go ahead and follow through. Please take a few moments to enter that. We have a few more results trickling in. Give that a few more seconds. And great. Okay, it looks like 24% say they use skill and competency assessments. 62% use developmental activities and strategies. 18% say they flat out don't follow through. The rest don't know or have entered other.
Okay, sounds like we've got some really strong succession planning processes going here, especially with that first question, and 61% saying that they did have a plan, and then in the second poll that we talked about having targeted development activities at 50%, and then again 62% saying that they really do use strong developmental activities and strategies. So this is really great that you do have this strong of a succession plan in place. So what we want to do now again is talk about, okay, what's those differences between succession planning and succession development. And in addition to that, what we want to talk about is how can mentoring assist in something like that in going forward. So what we want to do is talk about a couple of ways in which mentoring really can assist in moving from just succession planning to succession development in doing this. One of the first things is mentoring develops ahead of time and just in time. One of the most important things about mentoring is it's time efficient. Individuals can get the type of development they need, and they can get it right away. Many times you can get it ahead of time because your mentors who are qualified, and if you know, and many of you said that, you actually look at you understand who's going to be leaving the organization. Could be retirement or whatever it might be, downsizing or those types of things. So if you know those things ahead of time in what you're doing, you actually can tap into some of that knowledge. And then again, have your people ready in what you're doing. And again, just in time learning is a great asset to mentoring and doing that. Now, the other thing that's really great about mentoring is not only is it just in time, so it's time efficient, it's also cost effective in what you're doing because you're using your organizational experience internally to support the learning of the individuals. Not only can you use that organizational and internal experience to help with the specific skills and knowledge areas needed for other positions, but what individuals can do is they can actually support that mentoring learning with organizational experience. One of the things that we find many times is individuals can go to a training class and you get education and you get information, but they're not quite sure exactly what that looks like when they get on the job. And this is one of the ways that mentoring really can support the individual who's learning by looking at that organizational experience, because it really does go beyond the classroom. We've all heard about the 70-20-10 model for learning and development in doing that. It really is designed, it builds upon how people internalize and really apply what they've learned based on how they acquire that knowledge. The idea being that 70% of individuals really acquire knowledge better and are able to internalize and apply the knowledge they receive from actual job experience. So when individuals actually get that learning from actual job experience, that's the highest number, that 70% for that model for learning and development. Now, we also know that 20% of that learning can come from information obtained from other individuals and what you're doing. And 10% comes from training through courses, reading, self-study, those types of things, but those types of training activities that are going on. Now, we are by no means saying that you should get and do away with your training courses and doing that. Training is very, very important for many areas, but what we are saying is that when you look at the 70 and the 20, that's where mentoring shines, because mentoring, 20% obtained from other people, this is information that comes from the mentees. And being able to actually take that and move it to actual job experience in what they're doing, that's that 70%. So this is an area where mentoring really shines. It goes beyond the classroom and really helps development. And when we talk about this organizational experience, we really need to see how organization and culture and the employee engagement really does tie into mentoring and really makes learning effective. So when we look at this, the benefits really are kind of twofold. One of the goals of mentoring is to help organizations actually create a career and talent development culture, really make it part of their internal learning culture. And individuals will be more engaged if they really feel that there's a focus on their own personal development and they're internalizing this. And if it's part of the organizational culture, the organization benefits as well from the individual through productivity and their enthusiasm. When you think of it, the organization's culture is made up of all the attitudes and practices, those that are job-related, those that are not, and those that really do persist in the organization. It's not just the organization's values, but it's the organization's norms and the way those values are absolutely implemented. That really is what makes up the organization's culture. Therefore, if you're using mentoring in doing this, you're not only helping employees navigate that specific culture, or sometimes a subculture as it currently exists, but you're also infusing the current culture with something positive and really helping your employees to engage in what they're doing, automatically increasing productivity and the ability of those successors to do their job. And, you know, when we talk about the successors, it's vitally important that they have an understanding of the organization culture and that they're enthusiastic about it. And again, having that at all levels. That's the role of mentee. But you know, also, you've got that sense of engagement and that sense of being committed to the organization from the mentors, because they're really invested, because they're working with an individual to really be able to look at and impart and teach that culture of what someone's doing. So let's kind of go through a case study now and kind of walk you through it. And as I mentioned before, the organization that we worked with, their succession pipeline was really, really weak. In fact, it was almost like they really didn't have a succession pipeline in what they were doing. And it really came from that organization that we talked about in the very beginning. You know, yesterday we thought the future was way off. Now it's here and we aren't ready. We don't have leaders or successors developed, and you know, we just can't let that happen again. So this is where they were at, and this is what they were doing. So here's what we did to help them in doing that. First of all, what we did was we identified those skills and competencies that were necessary for the future. In other words, when they took that future look at their organization and from a competitive standpoint, looking at the industry, looking at their profession, looking at the competition, all of these things, we began to identify what that future would look like and the skills and competencies that were necessary to do that. Then what we did is we actually used assessments and to help determine the skill competency gaps. So there were assessments based on where people were now, and then use those assessments to then look at, okay, how do we compare that to the skills and competencies for the future, and then what did they see that were the gaps in being able to do that. Mentors were qualified based on organizational leadership skills required for that future, as well as understanding of the organization's culture. So two very important things here. Number one, we took those organizational leadership competencies that were identified for the future, made sure the individuals had those. And then what we also did was making sure they also had that understanding of the organization's culture. So again, it wasn't just teaching the skills and competencies, but here's what they look like in our organization and within our organizational culture. Now, the second important element to that statement was mentors were qualified. And one of the things that we believe is that mentors need to be qualified. You need to make sure that the mentors you have are willing and able. And the willing means that they're committed to the mentoring partnership, to the mentoring program, and they're also committed to taking the time that it's going to be to help that mentee develop. The able part of that qualification means that they actually have the skills to be a good mentor. One of the things that we talk about is, you know, you can have individuals that are really good at doing something, and they're really good at a specific skill or competency, but they may not be able to then transfer that knowledge and that information to another in being able to do that. So the mentors need to make sure they not only have skill, competency, expertise, but you have to make sure that they've got all the skills to be a mentor, those relationship building skills, those coaching skills, those interpersonal skills, those communication skills, all those things that are necessary to actually function in the role of being a mentor. And then last, we identified individuals who had those skill competency gaps and assigned them a mentor. And then they were able to actually work very specifically on goals and objectives and those types of things that would be necessary for the future in doing that. So here were some of the results we went through. 32% of the high potentials moved into more senior level leadership roles. Now, we didn't say anything about job title here, but what we did say is, again, looking at it from a leadership standpoint and those leadership skills, 32% of those high potentials, and they looked, believe me, they looked at levels far below just senior levels. They went into middle management, and the next phase was to go farther down than that. But so they looked at all of these individuals. 32% moved into, more senior level roles. Training expenditures were reduced, and the reason this happened is because the type of development that these individuals needed, they were able to get through a mentoring partnership, or what happened is they went specifically to a training course or some type of education, but they spent fewer hours in the training course because they then took that information and then they worked with their mentor, and the mentor helped them to, even refine what they'd learned and then really look at what real-world practice was going to be with that particular skill knowledge area. Then also there was some results for an employee survey, and that indicated higher levels of employee engagement. And again, looking back on the fact that we talked about the employee engagement and the fact that, if individuals are more engaged and have a focus on their own personal development, they're going to be more engaged because they begin to realize, this is about me and what they're doing. In addition to that, the survey showed that there was more job satisfaction. Individuals felt like they were really getting the development that they needed, not just the training, but the development that they needed. And that led then to some key benefits, which meant they learned more about the practical application of skills that were learned, again, in these real-world situations in what they were doing. And they obtained a better understanding of what really was required to transition into a bigger role in the organization. So it wasn't just understanding the actual job description, so to speak, which many times we know the job description doesn't always match exactly what it takes to get the job done. But again, getting an understanding of what's that transition look like in order for me to get to a bigger, more complex role inside of the organization. So these were some of the real benefits that the organization was able to have. Looking at, being able to move people more quickly, training expenditures reduced, employee survey results were much better, and again, those key benefits of being able to learn about practical application and a better understanding of the bigger role. So we'll take you through some of the best practices that we took them through and that you can think about when you think about mentoring, again, for succession development and what you want to be able to do. So one of the very first best practices that we talk about is you've got to make sure that you actually unite the program objectives with your organizational objectives. Make sure that those talk to each other. There's a reason that you want to be doing mentoring, and you need to tie the objectives of why you're doing mentoring and why you're carrying this out for succession development to organizational objectives and what you're doing. Then think about, who are we going to roll this out to? Who should be, based on those organizational objectives and the objectives for the mentoring program, who should we be focusing on? And again, we sincerely hope that when you think in terms of these high potentials, that you really do look at all levels of the organization. And again, not just your senior levels. You want to make sure that, again, you're looking at this, the long-term focus as well as that short-term. Then you want to qualify your participants. And I mentioned this just a few moments ago, talking about how important it was to qualify the mentors, making sure you've got good quality mentors that are willing and able, being committed, and having the skills to be a mentor. But in addition to that, you've got to make sure you qualify your mentees, especially when you're talking about something around using the word succession. And whether it's succession planning or succession development, you've got to make sure your mentees are going into the mentoring partnership for all the right reasons. You want to make sure that the mentees are not going into the mentee or the mentoring partnership thinking, well, if I'm in a mentoring partnership, that automatically means I'm going to get promoted. No. You need to make it very clear in your mentoring program that it's not about promotion. It is about development. Now, if the development helps the mentee to move to more complex and bigger roles, that's great. But again, you've got to make sure that your mentees as well as your mentors are qualified in doing this. And then once you've got all your objectives, you know who your focus is, you've qualified your individuals, then you need to make sure that you're matching them, not just on, what they would like to do, but again, you're matching them based on those organizational objectives. Whatever it is that you want to focus on from a leadership standpoint, succession development standpoint, whatever it may be, make sure that your matching criteria matches those organizational objectives. And then communicate. Communicate to everybody in the organization, whether they're going to be a part of the program or not, the purpose of the program and the objectives to doing this. The reason you need to do this is because people need to understand what mentoring is and how it's being used. Remember, we talked about, how important it would be to make mentoring a part of career and talent development and a part of an organization's culture. Well, if your mentoring program around succession development becomes like a secret society, then people aren't going to make it and not consider mentoring and development as part of the organizational culture. So make sure you communicate. And you not only need to communicate the program and what it's about and the objectives of the program, but make sure you communicate to individuals that if they want to be able to be a part of this program, here's what they need to be able to do. And one of the things that we find is that many times individuals who say, oh, I want to be a part of this program, when they understand what it takes to really qualify and be a part of that program, sometimes they self-assess out. They just want something handed to them. And yet we believe that a mentoring partnership is really a lot of work. It's driven by the mentee and it's guided by the mentor in what they're doing. So again, make sure you communicate all the purpose and objectives to everyone. We also suggest that you take your mentoring program and you simplify it with technology. As I mentioned in the very beginning, technology is what keeps your mentoring program from becoming an administration nightmare. It helps you in your matching and pairing, whether you're doing self-matching or facilitated matching. Doesn't matter either one. But it helps in your matching and pairing. It helps the mentor and the mentee as they're putting their goals and objectives together in a learning plan, that they actually can be able to track progress to those objectives and what they're doing. It gives the administrators the ability to be able to communicate with everybody through, a mass communication process and to be able to kind of remind them of certain things. And definitely being able to track and report the mentoring, the goals, the progress of everybody to those individuals that really want to look at and treat the mentoring program as a business objective in what you're doing. When we talk to organizations and we hear the comment, we really would like to do mentoring, but we just haven't got the resources for it. There's two things we know for sure when we hear that comment. Number one, there wasn't a good plan in place, and it wasn't based on the organizational objectives and these types of things that it was going. There wasn't a good solid plan and an implementation plan in place. And second, they probably didn't have any technology, and all they could see in their mind was having to manage this massive program through spreadsheets or something like that. So again, make sure that you simplify your mentoring program with technology. And then train your participants. Make sure that everybody understands what their role is and what's expected of them. Don't make an assumption that everybody understands how to be a mentor or a mentee. One of the things that we talk about when we talk about mentoring is, the good news about mentoring is it's thousands of years old. And the bad news about mentoring is it's thousands of years old. And the reason we say that is there are so many different perceptions and experiences around what a mentor is, what a mentee is, and what mentoring is overall. So you want to make sure that, again, everybody is on the same page, everybody understands their role, they understand exactly how to implement that role, and how to handle certain situations that may come up in that mentoring partnership. So again, unite the program with organizational objectives. Focus on who your candidates are going to be that will help you implement those organization objectives. Qualify both your mentors and mentees. Make sure you match your mentors and mentees based on those organizational objectives and that criteria. Communicate it to the entire organization. Simplify it with technology, and make sure you train people in their roles. So as we summarize, some final thoughts. Again, succession planning versus succession development. Be proactive and not reactive when it comes to succession planning by making sure you develop your successors before they take on a new role. Think about any job or role inside your organization. When someone goes into a role, many times what happens is we provide them with training after they're in there. So what happens is you're already in that reactive mode. So wouldn't it be really great to have individuals ready before they actually take on their new role? Think about the organizational culture. And remember, it's not just the skill set that the mentee needs to understand, but exactly how that skill set is implemented within your organization. And you know, how certain, skills, communication or project management or any type of leadership skill. When you think about that, that might look very different inside of your organization versus someone else's organization. And it's what does it look like in doing that? So make sure you keep that organizational culture in mind as you go forward. And then remember, don't just develop your successors, make sure you engage them. And one of the best ways that you can do that is, again, making sure that individuals understand that being a high potential has nothing to do with job grade level. It has to do with their potential. And in addition to that, making sure that individuals really have a clear sense that they are working on their own development, that you're providing them with tools and opportunities and for their own development. And believe me, they will be much more engaged in doing this. And finally, make sure, again, you develop those lower levels as well as your top levels. If you only are looking at the top levels of the organization, that's much more short-term focus, where if you're looking at all levels of the organization, that's much more long-term focus in what you're doing. So at this point in time, we would like to address some of the questions that have come up. So Blake, can you tell us some of the questions that we have received?
Yeah, absolutely. Here's a good one. It's in relation to qualifying mentors. Basically, the question is, why do we even need to qualify mentors? Why not use more organic matching and pairing and have mentors and mentees self-select? So why don't you tell us a little bit about the differences between formal and informal matching?
Oh, I'd love to do that, and that's a really, really good question. When we talk about qualifying mentors, what we're talking about is even before they match and pair in what they're doing. The very first step of what you want to be able to do is again, going back to some of those historical misperceptions about what a mentor is, what a mentee is, and what mentoring is overall. You want to make sure that you create a pool of qualified mentors. Now, if those mentors aren't qualified, I guarantee you can run into some real problems, and the individual that really suffers the most from that is your mentee. So the first thing is make sure you've got that qualified pool of mentors, then do your matching and pairing. We definitely are not saying that you should not do self-matching. I think that's absolutely great, and I think it's from an engagement standpoint and committed standpoint, that's one of the best ways to do it, is to do that kind of self-matching. But you want to make sure that you're matching qualified mentors and qualified mentees, because if you're not, then basically that's informal mentoring. I mean, I'm sure that you know that informal mentoring is going on inside your organization. A couple of the things that we talk about that is a difference between informal mentoring or informal matching and formal mentoring and matching is that in informal mentoring, number one, you have no way of knowing if the time and effort that the mentors and mentees are spending together is helping the organization meet their goals, or the organization's getting any type of return on investment for the time they're spending together. And probably one of the biggest things that we've seen happen is if you're doing and you don't have good qualified mentors and mentees and have them trained and they're understanding their role, one of the worst things that can happen in informal mentoring is bad habits get passed on in what you're doing. So to kind of clarify and make sure we're all on the same page, we're not talking about the fact that you should not have self-matching. I think self-matching is absolutely great, but you want to make sure that if the mentee is going through and selecting a mentor, they're feeling confident that that mentor is actually qualified to be a good mentor.
Yeah, thank you for that distinction. This one's related to the methods of setting up succession planning. So, Judy, what are your thoughts on using annual performance reviews to inform the kinds of development activities that you'd use for preparing for succession?
I think if your annual reviews are done and done correctly, this can be very good. I have to be honest, a lot of organizations, when you think about annual reviews, usually both employees and managers kind of dread them and in looking at that. So, you know, if you have a way in which annual reviews are done and they're done well and both managers and employees are very engaged and really value what goes on during that, you know, annual evaluation process, then I think an annual evaluation can be very good. Here's two caveats to that. First of all, I'd like to see it done more than annual. You know, if you're only doing this once a year, chances are you're still going to be in that reactive mode. So you need to think about doing it in more of a at least, you know, twice a year basis. So doing it more often. The other thing I would say that we have seen inside of a lot of organizations is the fact that there's an annual review, and normally the annual review is based on a simplicity or around here's the goals and objectives that you were assigned the last time, here's how you met them, here's the goals and objectives for, you know, the next annual period, and then here's what you need to do to develop to help you get those objectives taken care of. Unfortunately, many times what we find is the follow-through on that. You've got the meeting and it starts out with a bang and doing those kind of things. So the follow-through on that is not exactly what it should be. In addition to that, many times if it's only done once a year, you know, things change too fast. We've got one organization that we work with, and they do actually performance appraisals and annual reviews on a quarterly basis, but they concentrate on shorter periods of time. So instead of with an annual review having 5 or 6 different goals and objectives somebody's going to work on, with a quarterly review you've got normally one. And so as you're going through that, it's easier to keep up with the type of change that every organization goes through in doing that, plus the fact that the development needed to carry out those changes is a lot easier to be able to work with, and you've got a better handle on your succession development issues and your succession planning possibilities. Remember, we in the very beginning I made the comment about the fact that many times in succession planning that the decisions are based on what one thinks versus based on what they know. So if you're doing your reviews more often, you've got a lot more data, more updated data to make a decision based on what you know.
So it sounds like it has a lot to do with both the process of doing performance reviews, but also the organizational culture in that case.
And the timing and doing them more often, yes.
Do you think it's possible to invest too early in people you've identified as high potentials? And then, just to expound on that, are there any cultural or morale risks involved in beginning a mentoring process for succession if it doesn't work out with a particular engagement?
Wow. I'm going to answer can you read the first part of that again, Blake? Yeah.
Can you ever just invest too early in people that you've identified as high potentials?
I think you can if you are driving that and the individuals that you want to invest in aren't ready. In other words, if one of the things that we talk about around mentoring is that it's mentee driven. And I have to tell you, mentoring is not for everybody. There are some individuals who that's not a good way for them to learn. So if you are pushing for someone to be in a mentoring partnership and they're not really ready to do that, yeah, I think you can invest too early. Other than that, if you've got individuals, what's the worst thing that happens if you're investing in somebody? They develop, they learn, they get better. That can only be good for the organization. So the only caveat I would put in that is if you're trying to push something on somebody that's not ready, then I think that could be too early in doing that. And could you give me the second part of that question?
Sure. Are there any cultural or negative morale risks involved in beginning a mentoring process for succession if it doesn't work out for the person you've selected as a high potential?
I don't think so. I can tell you that if you aren't very, very clear when you roll out your mentoring initiative to let people totally understand through communications, through information, through training, that this is not a guarantee. Absolutely not a guarantee of promotion. One of those historical misperceptions around mentoring was that if an individual was in a mentoring program or in a mentoring partnership, they were automatically on a fast track. And you've got to get rid of that perception. You've got to get rid of people thinking, I'm going to get promoted. If you can get rid of that type, and it's hard to get rid of, but all you can do is communicate about it. If you can do that, then people clearly understand that it's up to them. We talk about the fact that the mentoring partnership is mentee driven. The number one criteria for the matching and pairing should be around development, and the mentees should drive that development. They should want to drive their own development. So if someone doesn't, get a part of looking at a bigger role or something like that, they've still got development in what they're doing. So again, I'd have to say from my standpoint that as long as you've been clear, it's about development, it's not about promotion in what you're doing. I can't see that there can be any cultural problem in doing that. But that's also why I talked about one of the success factors had to be that you had to communicate the purpose and the objective to the entire organization. Because if it becomes a secret society in what you're doing, people are going to come up with their own conclusions. They're going to make their own assumptions about doing this and about what the program is about. And then if somebody doesn't, then they can go back and say, well, I knew that wasn't going to be work. But it's because they didn't have all the information and they had their own perceptions in what they were doing. So, you want to make sure that the program is communicated and clear about the objectives and exactly how it's going to be rolled out. That was kind of a two-part complicated question. I hope the answer was clear.
Seems clear to me. Really just about communication and then support from the organizational culture, it sounds.
Absolutely.
Okay. Perhaps we have time for one more?
Okay.
Okay. So far we've discussed succession specifically for the purpose of replacing people in the pipeline for positions of leadership. What are your thoughts about using mentoring for succession that would be not necessarily for leadership roles, but for more specialized roles that have to be filled?
I think it's perfect. I think mentoring can be used in that way also. And let me clarify that when I talk about leadership roles, that doesn't necessarily have anything to do with the job title. So in doing that, so we think, well, somebody's not in leadership until they get the title of manager. Individuals can actually be able to use and demonstrate leadership capabilities having nothing to do with job grade or job title. So I wanted to make that clear in doing that. But looking at the question from the standpoint of I think mentoring can, as a development tool for a successor in any job, whether it's technical, whether it happens to be, you know, more of a leadership role, technical, it doesn't matter, you know, what the job role is or the job title. I think mentoring individuals to take on other roles is absolutely great. And again, what's really great about that is the individual that is the mentor can actually really get that mentee to understand, this is what this job looks like in real life. This is what this job looks like within our organization. Because again, we all know that you could take two job descriptions from, you know, one from organization A and one from organization B, and they might look the same, but how they're implemented is very, very different. And for those of you that have ever gone through any kind of career transition or have gone through a long interviewing process and you were looking for one particular role that you were going for, I'm sure that you actually have experienced this in doing that. Same job description, but it looks real different in each organization. So the individual that is going to be the mentor in that case can really say, this is what this job looks like within this organization and this culture. Good question.
Fantastic. Okay, one more, I promise. The people have spoken. They'd like to know, how can we actually use technology and software to support a mentoring program?
Great question, and we really believe this is important. Here's some of the things that the technology can do. First of all, it can help you in that qualifying for your, you know, your mentors and mentees, and make sure you've got a good pool of qualified mentors and qualified mentees. And then, you know, the technology can help you in the matching and pairing in what you're doing. Again, whether it's self-matching organically, as somebody had said, or whether it happens to be facilitated matching, where somebody really is kind of helping in that matching and pairing and what they're doing. But the other thing a technology can do is that if the mentor and mentee put together a very specific plan of goals and objectives they want to accomplish, and we feel they should, then the technology can help both the mentor and mentee and the organization be able to track those goals and you know, make sure they're on target. And you know, if the mentee is not getting the goals accomplished as they should, you know, the mentor can help the mentee to kind of push this along in what they're doing. So, and in addition to that, it becomes a great way for the organization to be able to measure success of the mentoring program and what you're doing. And then from the other side, from looking at it, from being able to administer the program, you know, having the ability to send out, you know, kinds of, you know, emails and mass communications, and thinking in terms of triggers. You know, we have some organizations that actually will say, well, at this point in time, have you done certain things? Have certain things been accomplished? Have you chosen a mentor or mentee? Or if you're in your mentoring partnership, here's some information. And you're able to come up with certain triggers on your emails. And for an administrator, and being able to save time and being able to set up those triggers, I mean, the time savings is just incredible. Plus the fact that at any point in time, when somebody's saying, I need a report on, you know, XYZ, as long as you've got a field in your technology, you can run that report. And where I remember one organization saying that they had to put together 4 or 5 different spreadsheets every time somebody wanted a report. Well, the difference between that and being able to, you know, put your reports together and punch a button and here it is, time savings again can be absolutely incredible. So I would say from the user side, it really is, again, engaging and being able to choose a mentor and work with a mentor and so on. And from the administration time, you know, the time savings is just incredible. We actually have done several webinars and really, you know, showed percentage-wise and dollar-wise what technology can really help an organization, especially from an administration standpoint.
Well, thank you so much, Judy. Looks like we're about out of time. Do you have any final thoughts?
I do. I just thank all of you for participating today. I'm really glad that you could join us. We do want you to make sure that you watch your emails for registration for our next webinar on Tuesday, May the 20th. The first mentoring programs, and that fear-free approach. That one's going to be interesting for me to be able to say a tongue twister, a fear-free approach, because we do hear from individuals saying, you know, we'd like to do mentoring, but I'm afraid. You know, what are we doing going forward? So we also invite you to join our Thought Leaders Club and to go to our website at www.mentoringtalent.com because we have an entire website that is devoted to mentoring and all of the information that's there. So again, thank you very much for your participation.
Thank you to everyone for attending today's webinar. If you'd like a copy of today's slideshow or a recording of today's webinar, you can find links to both on our Mentoring Thought Leaders Club group page on LinkedIn. We'll also post answers to popular questions that we didn't get a chance to answer today. If you have any questions, comments, or feedback, please feel free to email us at info@insala.com. We very much value your feedback on our webinars. So thanks again for coming, and have a great day.